Something deeply troubling is happening in the corridors of power, and it appears the United States Congress has finally had enough of South Africa's systematic campaign to silence those who dare speak truth to power. Members of both the Republican and Democratic parties have now formally expressed what they call growing concern about the subversion of press freedom in South Africa. But this isn't about journalists being denied access to government buildings or having their questions ignored at press conferences. No, this runs much deeper, much darker, and frankly, much more dangerous. What we are witnessing is a coordinated effort by South Africa's state security agency working hand in glove with certain media outlets to actively target and neutralize whistleblowers who expose inconvenient truths about this government's activities. The most recent evidence of this comes from a landmark ruling by the South African Press Ombudsman, which found News 24 and its editor-in-chief Adrian Basson guilty of publishing what can only be described as deliberate disinformation. But here's where it gets particularly interesting. The ruling specifically found that News 24's reporting was designed to delegitimize victims of property rights violations by portraying legitimate concerns about farm expropriation as nothing but conspiracy theories. They failed to consult key sources, neglected to seek comment from those they accused, and constructed what the Ombudsman called a one-sided narrative. Now, you might think this is just sloppy journalism, but the congressional staffers who did speak to National Security News see something far more sinister than you. One senior staffer described this as not just an indictment of one article, but an exposure of News 24's editorial bias and its craven willingness to sacrifice journalistic integrity in the service of the state security agency's operations. The pattern becomes clearer when you look at other cases. Rob Hersov, an internationally respected business leader, visited the United States and raised concerns about ANC corruption and the extent of the funding the ANC receives from Iran. Within days, News 24 launched what can only be described as a vicious character assassination, spreading what congressional resources call calculated disinformation under the guise of fact-checking. Then there's the case of Emma Powell, a Democratic Alliance member of Parliament who had the audacity to expose the deception by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Powell, conveniently, was later vindicated when the foreign minister admitted that Mcebisi Jonas had never actually visited the United States as claimed. But instead of acknowledging her accuracy, the Minister for Intelligence leaked a classified state security agency report to the media based on what Powell describes as illegal surveillance conducted on her during a visit to Washington. Think about that for a moment. A sitting member of parliament representing the official opposition in a constitutional democracy was apparently surveilled by state security services while conducting legitimate parliamentary business in a foreign country. The classified report detailing this surveillance was then leaked to journalists who used it to publish what Powell calls a hit piece designed to undermine her credibility. Powell's response reveals the gravity of what we're dealing with here. She points out that both the potential surveillance of a sitting member of parliament by state security services, as well as the targeted leaking of a classified report in a clear attempt to tarnish and intimidate such a member, are serious criminal offenses under South African law. But here's the most chilling part of this whole operation. Congressional leaders are now discussing these cases in the context of General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi's recent revelations about senior politicians' involvement in the assassination of whistleblowers and the infiltration of the state security agency by violent drug cartels involved in contract killings. One congressional leader put it bluntly: if anything were to happen to these brave South Africans for speaking out about the Iranian threat, we will hold the journalists who colluded with the state security agency accountable. Another noted that in light of General Mkwanazi's serious allegations about the assassination of whistleblowers such as Armand Swart, News 24's reporting is clearly and knowingly putting the lives of these South African leaders at risk. This isn't hyperbole. We are literally talking about a documented pattern where state scrutiny agencies work with compliant journalists who target, harass, and potentially endanger the lives of people whose only crime is speaking truth about government corruption and dangerous foreign entanglements. The American response is becoming increasingly serious. Congressional leaders are now urgently discussing incorporating specific protections for whistleblowers, measures to combat disinformation, and provisions for media accountability into H.R. 2633, the U.S. South African Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025. I hope I said it right. What's particularly telling is that News 24 has no policy or controls regarding its journalists engaging with the state security agency as a source for stories. In other words, South Africa's intelligence services can feed information directly to journalists with no oversight, no verification, and no accountability. Even more concerning, News 24 failed to disclose that MTN Group, co-owner of MTN Iran Cell I, the platform of the Iranian Ministry of Defense, that is the subject of 4 different lawsuits in the US for alleged support of Iranian terrorist operations, is one of their largest paying media partners. They failed to include that. So we have a media outlet taking money from companies linked to Iranian intelligence operations, while simultaneously serving as a conduit for South African intelligence operations, targeting whistleblowers who expose those very Iranian connections. The United States has clearly decided, pardon my Greece, that this systematic silencing of whistleblowers represents not just a domestic South African problem, but a threat to American national security interests. When Congress starts talking about incorporating whistleblower protection measures specifically aimed at South Africa into bilateral relations legislation, you know they've moved beyond diplomatic concern to active intervention planning. The message from Washington is clear. America will not stand by while South Africa's government actively uses state security apparatus and compliant media to silence those who expose threats to both countries' security interests. The question now is whether South Africa will heed this warning, whether South Africa's government will heed this warning, or whether they shall continue down this dangerous path of systematically targeting anyone who dares to speak truth about their activities. Based on the pattern we've seen so far, I suspect we already know the answer to that question. The United States has exposed South Africa's attempt to silence violent crimes against whistleblowers. Now we wait to see what they intend to do about it.